I'm Jeff Hendler. I'm co-founder and CEO of Logical Buildings. We're a cloud software platform that is helping building owners across the United States uh, transition to being a building that is a grid interactive building whose goals are to lower usage and carbon emissions, and all do it with the capability of creating value of lower costs and even revenue for the building and its residents and tenants. The Climate Mobilization Act, which is now a law, it's local law 97, and in New York City and other cities are looking at that legislation to adopt in their locales. Basically sets a carbon cap based on square footage of a building. And based on that carbon cap, if you exceed the carbon emissions based on what you're allocated for your building, you pay a financial penalty, which can be really rather onerous. Buildings can be, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars over their cap. And the way this was engineered in terms of the calculation, starting in 2024, over 25,000 buildings will be fined and being over their carbon cap. And starting in 2030, 80% will be fined based on current usage levels and what that produces in terms of carbon. So the question for owner landlords, especially in New York City, that are facing these fines around the corner, they're already, through a quarter of 2023, 2024 isn't too far away. Is what do we do? And the first thing what an owner needs to do is measure what their usage is. Okay, it sounds really simple, but they need to know what's their baseline. Where are they right now? And determine what those carbon penalties can be. The math is available. So there's companies like Logical Buildings and others that can do those calculations to at least know from a baseline, am I exposed to these types of penalties? How close am I to that carbon cap? I might be under the bar, but it's like a limbo trick. I'm only 10% away. And what if I have a hot or cold seasonal year and I'm using more energy and I might be above those caps? What can I do to ensure that I am reducing my usage, staying under those caps for the foreseeable future, so that my building wouldn't be exposed to those fines? That's the big question for New York City right now. You have like a certain types of carbon compliance that's out there nationally, some of which is voluntary. ESG. On their own, companies are making their own types of uh, guidance of they want to reduce 30% by 2030 or 40% by 2040, whatever it might be. That's pervasive now throughout the country, that companies are taking upon themselves voluntarily to have a plan in action that they can articulate to their shareholders that this is what we're doing to have a positive environmental impact on our built space. Then you have the next category where you have actual regulation where, well, if based on your usage that you have to calculate every year and you have to report to, authorities like the EPA through Energy Star reports. So you have a protocol of calculation that is universal for buildings that everyone can subscribe to and know what's apples to apples based on my energy usage that will determine a score and a letter grade. And certain cities like New York or in Chicago or in Boston and DC, I mean, it's all over, will come out with a letter score. And some, locales like New York will say, well, you have to take that letter score and post it in your public, throwaway and entrance. But it's like kind of like, would you walk into a restaurant in New York City that has a D on it? Probably not. Do you want to live in a building that's a D? If you're renting out your space, or if you're working for a corporate entity, do you want to be in a D? Knowing that they're not really complying. The new regime of policy that is now effective in New York is actual financial penalties through Local Law 97, as we discussed, as the Climate Mobilization Act, which is incredibly onerous to anyone who owns a building that's above 25,000 square feet, which there's like close to 50,000 of those types of entities in New York City. So it's a lot of building stock, a lot to be improved upon. And what's even more challenging for an owner of those buildings, it's the entire block and lot of the building. So if an owner, has a multifamily building, for example, which is a majority of the stock of where energy is flowing through, an example in New York City, the multifamily building is a hybrid of common area space. There's a lobby, there's elevators, there's hallways to cool. It might be amenitized, there might be a gym, there might be a business lounge. They're also on the street level. You might have retail tenants, like there's a pharmacy, a coffee shop, a laundromat. Well, all that is in the same block and lot of that building, and the city views that building as one entity consuming energy and carbon. All the players in that building, whether they're retail tenants, it's a residential units, it all rolls up, and the owner of that building who's leasing out that space is now going to be exposed to penalties based on the consumption of energy and carbon within that space. So what is an owner to do? I mean, how do they control the residential space? How do they control the retail space? They can control their common area space. They need to calculate not just what the carbon content, so to speak, of their common areas, but the entire space as I described. What that does is now give an incentive for owners of the built space to make investments to improve the energy efficiency beyond their own domain of the common area for the very first time. So it's aligning interests. It used to be a split incentive. Like, why should an owner invest in smarter thermostats in the in-unit apartment when an in-unit apartment might be directly metered to the utility and they're not going to see a benefit? Well, that's part of why the Climate Mobilization Act was written in this format, is to force owners of real estate to make those investments, because it will avoid that financial penalty and will put in more efficient controls to create the ability to have a lower carbon footprint. So that is where all the action is happening right now. Is what is my carbon footprint across my entire block and lot, even those spaces I don't have control over? Do I have a penalty? How is my building configured, like mechanically, electrically, the plumbing? The advent of smart HVAC and now smarter appliances that have been energy hogs, that have not ever been managed before, that now can be managed. Well, now there's an incentive for building owners to make these capital improvements, to now have greater capacity to reduce their capacity and create value in terms of for the environment, but also it's going to lower their cost of operation. It's a really exciting time for owners of buildings to now rethink, reimagine what they can do with their built space. What's really interesting now, part of the whole energy transition and decarbonizing buildings that these carbon compliance regulations are demanding, are looking for electrification of heat. So getting away from fossil fuel, like using natural gas to heat your building. Let you use electric heat pumps. The other thing that they're pushing for is electrification of mobility. So greater and greater demand for electric vehicle chargers are now becoming more pervasive throughout the city and throughout the states. And it's really interesting because it's actually affecting the leasing decisions of residents moving into a building. One of the first questions they are now asking is, do you have an EV charger? There's this demand for electric vehicle charging, which is a conundrum because, yes, that's going to help reduce fossil fuel use, but it's also for that building, it is going to increase usage of electricity. So what that's going and we see happening in the market is that smarter software of load management is coming into play to manage that conundrum. But the good news is that that's solvable, and the markets have provided a paradigm to make that work. And then the one other item that's going to help, fuel the transition is all the incentives that are now available that never were before. So it's not just, oh, just a financial penalty. Well, guess what? The federal government has passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and that's provided 3 buckets of incentives for owners of real estate to make energy efficient capital improvements to avoid these carbon penalties. One bucket is pure cash incentives for investing in energy efficient equipment, like a heat pump. Uh, so another bucket is investment tax credits for putting in, some type of renewable resource or using battery storage. And then there's an area of just tax deductions for making improvements in the building that are going to foster energy efficiency. So there's a lot of other good news along the way in terms of a carrot as opposed to a stick when it comes to carbon compliance. The IRA and also state agencies like NYSERDA in New York and other states have their state agency, or the local utility will have cash incentive programs or what they call demand response programs where you get paid for reducing your energy use. All that rolls up to create an ROI and a cash on cash return for building owners to literally transform their building into a virtual power plant. And we're seeing calculations of 50% cash on cash returns. I mean, it's not something to run away and stick your head in the sand as an owner. Actually, there's a great financial driver here, motivator to fund this change into a decarbonized environment.